When the storybook prince, the charming face of royalty, peels back his glittering disguise and reveals not a man, but a monster in slow motion, not a fall from grace, but a descent that began in childhood and was simply never stopped. Cheating, stealing, violence, fraud, pedophilia, treason, not wild accusations, but a reality so grim it could only hide behind the iron gates of a palace for so long. This is the story of Prince Andronaut, a tale of redemption, but of rot, not an isolated scandal, but a lifetime of unchecked power. Born into golden walls and velvet lies, Andrew was cradled not by love, but by entitlement. At 65 years old, the glossy facade has shattered. The prince, once meant to be the monarchy's charming soldier, now stands as its greatest shame, a man exposed not by rumors, but by the trail of damage left in his wake. He never had to say the words. His silence screamed them. The world was right. The whispers were warnings. And the palace, willfully blind, did nothing. Even as a boy, the signs were there. According to royal biographer Ingrid Seward, 5-year-old Andrew once wandered into the Windsor Castle stables. There he mocked guards, kicked dogs, swung sticks at horses' legs. When asked to stop, he refused. Only after relentless provocation did 2 grooms throw him into a pile of manure and shovel it over him, a moment that could have taught him boundaries. But nothing followed. No consequences. No reflection. Just more indulgence in another incident. He tormented a footman so cruelly that the man breaking every rule hit him, leaving a black eye. The queen refused to punish the servant. Even she believed her son had earned the blow. But what did Andrew learn? Not humility, not empathy. He learned that power means never having to change. He learned that you could provoke and still be protected. He learned that privilege wasn't just freedom from rules, it was the weapon you used to bend others to your will. These were not childhood pranks. They were early chapters in a much darker story. The same child who mocked guards at 5 would grow into the man who screamed at staff over curtain gaps and misplaced teddy bears. Yes, teddy bears lined in precise military order. A handwritten map to guide terrified maids through his childlike obsession. A wrong move meant a verbal lashing to the public. It was bizarre to the staff. It was abuse. Behind palace doors, Prince Andrew was not the dashing bachelor prince of media fantasy. While Princess Diana lit the world with grace and compassion, Andrew became known as cruel, petty, and pathologically entitled. Servants dreaded his moods. Charlotte Briggs, a former maid, recalled being humiliated over the smallest errors. Screamed at by a man who believed he was above everyone, perhaps even above reality. This wasn't eccentricity. It was dysfunction. Dressed in royal blue, and the damage didn't end with hurt feelings or broken protocols, because a man raised to believe he was untouchable eventually stops touching the ground altogether. And when that man is finally dragged back down by scandal, shame, and the sheer weight of truth, we're left not with a fall from grace, but the revelation that grace was never there to begin with. This is why the world doesn't just dislike Prince Andrew, it despises him. Not because he lost his way, but because he never believed the rules applied to him in the first place. Because the palace didn't raise a prince, it sheltered a predator. At 35, Prince Andrew still threw tantrums like a spoiled 5-year-old. And those outbursts, his mother excused them, while his father, Prince Philip, coldly dismissed him as the spare, the man forever destined to play second fiddle to Charles, but mercifully freed from the crushing weight of royal responsibility. That freedom wasn't a blessing. It was a poison feeding the darkest parts of Andrew's nature as he stepped into adulthood. The public dubbed him Andy the reckless playboy prince who thrived on scandal. Unlike his more guarded brothers, Andrew flaunted his wild lifestyle like a badge of honor. He chased actresses and models, paraded his wealth, and strutted through life believing he was untouchable. When he married Sarah Ferguson in 1986, the fairy tale promised to bring stability, but it collapsed in ruin. Their marriage was shattered by betrayal and scandal. Ferguson caught in compromising situations, and Andrew running his own reckless course. They divorced. But their bizarre closeness afterward only stoked the rumors that whispered behind palace walls to the monarchy. Andrew was no longer a proud representative of the crown. He was a loose cannon and unpredictable liability. The 1990s only deepened the decay. While Britain tightened its belt through recessions and austerity, Andrew took to the skies, living it up on taxpayer-funded helicopters and private jets. The press, relentless, labeled him Air Miles Andy, as millions vanished on his extravagant globe-trotting. Lavish holidays, misuse of his military status for perks. The public's anger simmered and boiled. Why was this man who barely showed up for duty, draining money, while ordinary families suffered? He dismissed the criticism with a sneer. Sure, his royal title made him untouchable, but no one saw just how far his arrogance would drag him and the monarchy into the mud. Inside the palace, whispers grew louder. Staff noticed his desperate obsession with status symbols, from the dizzying array of medals pinned to his uniform to the parade of women in clubs and restaurants. Andrew craved admiration, but respect, that was beyond his reach. Friends called him gullible, an easy mark for flattery, eager to cozy up to anyone who fed his fragile ego with illusions of importance. This fatal flaw, the hunger for validation at any cost, would become the key to his undoing. By the late 1990s, Andrew's naval career was over. The search for purpose led him to a trade envoy role, tasked with boosting British business abroad. Instead, he turned it into yet another scandal. Reports surfaced tying him to dictators and dubious businessmen. Leaked U.S. diplomatic cables painted a damning portrait: arrogant, rude, dismissive, and embarrassment to the officials trying to work with him. The prince, who once wore military discipline like armor, now symbolized greed and corruption. The press mocked him without mercy, yet Andrew carried on with smug confidence, backed by the greatest shield money in monarchy could buy, the Queen herself. She covered his debts, smoothed over scandals, desperate to preserve her son's dignity. But behind the gilded curtains of Buckingham Palace, even the staff had already drawn their conclusions. The prince was a problem that no amount of royal protection could fix. What the public was only beginning to suspect. Behind the palace walls was far worse than mere immaturity. Andrew wasn't just reckless, he was a poison threatening the very survival of the crown. His selfishness knew no limits. His behavior spiraled ever further into recklessness, and his circle of so-called friends became increasingly toxic, laced with shadows no decent man would dare approach. If you think that sounds unbelievable, brace yourself, because it was Ghislaine Maxwell who introduced him to Jeffrey Epstein. To Andrew, Epstein's world glittered with luxury: private jets, dazzling mansions, endless parties filled with models and celebrities. What he found or refused to see was the darkness lurking beneath the glamour. Epstein's name already carried whispered warnings in elite circles, whispers that should have set off alarms in any sane man's mind. But Andrew didn't run. He embraced the poison. Blinded by greed, dazzled by status, he dove headfirst into a world built on exploitation. Those who had suffered under his temper, his arrogance, his entitlement, all knew exactly why. This wasn't new. It was who he always was. The public would later recoil in horror at a photograph: Andrew, his arm draped around the waist of Virginia Giuffret, then a minor, while Ghislaine Maxwell smiled in the background like a sinister chaperone. To the world it was a shocking revelation. But for the palace staff, it was confirmation. The man who screamed over curtains and stuffed animals, who demanded absolute obedience, who strutted through life without an ounce of shame, was now exposed in the vilest light imaginable, and that was only the beginning. Prepare yourself for the painful, disgusting details you're about to hear. By the late 1990s, Andrew's reputation had decayed so badly even palace insiders began to openly question his future. His 1996 divorce from Sarah Ferguson, an event that should have been a fresh start only, marked a new chapter in his public humiliation. Months later, tabloids exploded with photos of Ferguson having her toes sucked by her financial advisor. The scandal stained both of their names. But Andrew's refusal to cut ties with her only deepened public confusion and suspicion. For years after the divorce, the pair lived in a bizarre on-again, off-again relationship that fueled rumors of financial entanglements no one fully understood. Meanwhile, Andrew sank further into the reckless playboy lifestyle that earned him his infamous nickname, Randy Andy. His relationships with actresses, models, and socialites became weekly gossip fodder. But there was desperation beneath the bravado. At one point, he was rumored to have dated Caprice Barrett, a relationship that ended in public ridicule. The once handsome prince was aging poorly in the public eye, mocked as a middle-aged man desperately clinging to the reckless image of youth. When the Queen appointed him Britain's special representative for international trade and investment in 2001, many hoped it would lend him some dignity. Instead, it handed him a license to exploit. Supposedly, Andrew was meant to open doors for British business abroad. In reality, he transformed the role into his personal playground, flying private jets, staying in lavish hotels, hobnobbing with controversial businessmen and autocrats. Reports surfaced of his friendship with Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif, and other dictators, raising uncomfortable questions about why a senior royal was cozying up to such figures. Leaked American diplomatic cables from 2010 confirmed what officials had long whispered behind closed doors. U.S. diplomats described Andrew as cocky, rude, dismissive, and bordering on offensive when discussing anti-corruption efforts. At a lunch in Kyrgyzstan, he stunned British and American officials by ranting about journalists and lecturing on how governments should ignore public opinion. Instead of embodying British values, Andrew embodied embarrassment, his arrogance overshadowing his royal duty. But arrogance wasn't his worst flaw. It was his susceptibility to flattery. Businessmen quickly learned that a few compliments could unlock the doors to a British prince's favor. Andrew wove friendships with Kazakh oligarchs, even selling his sprawling Sunning Hill Park estate to one for €15 million, €3 million above asking price. The mansion sat empty and rotting afterward, confirming suspicions it was a shady favor disguised as a sale. Money questions followed him everywhere. Where did his wealth truly come from? Who was funding his lavish lifestyle? And most terrifyingly, what had he traded for it? It was in this toxic environment that Ghislaine Maxwell stepped in, introducing Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein, an offer he couldn't refuse. To Andrew, Epstein was the answer to everything he'd been losing: wealth, power, and most importantly, relevance. The prince, who was fading into public ridicule, suddenly found himself swept into the dazzling world of New York's elites, surrounded by models, celebrities, and billionaires. He never asked about Epstein's dark past. Or maybe he simply didn't care. What mattered was that Epstein treated him like royalty even when Britain no longer did. Andrew's visits to Epstein's properties soon became a troubling pattern. Flight logs would later reveal Andrew flying on Epstein's private jet. Witnesses remembered seeing him at Epstein's New York mansion. Photographs captured them strolling through Central Park. Even after Epstein had served time for sex crimes, the world was stunned. How could a senior royal associate so openly with a convicted sex offender? For Andrew, it was just business as usual. He waved off Epstein's crimes as inconvenient rumors. Convinced his royal name could withstand any scandal, then came the photograph. In 2001, Virginia Giuffre, then just 17, came forward, claiming she had been trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell, forced into sexual encounters with powerful men including Prince Andrew. The damning photo showed Andrew smiling in a London townhouse, his arm draped around her bare waist, Maxwell grinning behind them. To Andrew, it was a trivial, forgettable moment to the world. It was damning proof. He denied everything. He claimed no memory of meeting her. Even though the photograph told a different story, he insisted he had never been upstairs in Maxwell's townhouse. He insisted he had no reason to associate with Giuffre. But his excuses rang hollow. Each denial only deepened the growing suspicion he was lying. The palace scrambled to contain the damage, but the story only spiraled worse. Journalists uncovered more. Andrew stayed at Epstein's New York mansion after Epstein's conviction. To most people, it was unthinkably royal setting foot in the home of a convicted trafficker of minors. To Andrew, it was just a convenient place to stay, as more women bravely came forward against Epstein. Andrew's name surfaced repeatedly in court documents and news reports. The palace tried to shield him, to wall him off from the scandal, but it was too late. The man once mocked as a spoiled, irrelevant playboy was now tied to one of the darkest criminal networks of the modern era. His behavior once dismissed as arrogance or eccentricity now revealed as dangerously reckless. Those tales of bullying servants, tantrums over curtains, and obsessive demands about teddy bears no longer sounded like childish quirks. They sounded like the scars of a man who had never been told. No one ever faced consequences, never learned the meaning of boundaries. For years, Britain tolerated Andrew's excesses, his wasteful spending, his womanizing, his arrogance. But Epstein exposed him as a liability the monarchy could no longer ignore. He had crossed a line that no palace wall could hide. And with that, his true downfall began. After 2019, Andrew's life no longer resembled that of a senior royal. The honorable prince who once walked proudly in military uniform and stood beside the Queen was suddenly a man without a role. His royal patronages were stripped away, his military ties severed, his calendar wiped clean. But the damage went deeper than lost appearances. Andrew was being quietly erased from the monarchy itself. While the scandals grew louder and more damning, the darkest truth wasn't just the photograph with a minor. It was the web of power and protection that had shielded him for so long. American investigators revealed Epstein's network extended far beyond him, encompassing politicians, CEOs, lawyers, and royalty. Andrew wasn't just a victim of poor judgment, he was a part of something far darker. For decades, Prince Andrew's position as the Queen's son acted like a shield insulating him from scrutiny and accountability. It wasn't merely that he had ties to Jeffrey Epstein. It was the unsettling truth that Britain's monarchy had protected him from facing the consequences in 2020. Explosive reports revealed the palace had pressured news outlets to bury stories about Andrew's connection to Epstein for years. One ABC anchor was caught on a hot mic admitting she had the story 3 years earlier but was stopped because it implicated powerful figures. Andrew enjoyed a silence that any ordinary man accused of such crimes could only dream of. Then came the moment that shattered whatever fragile credibility he had left. The disastrous 2019 BBC Newsnight interview, Facing Virginia. Giuffre's allegations. Andrew was forced into an extraordinary public fight for his reputation. He claimed he was nowhere near the alleged encounters, asserting he was dining at a Pizza Express in Woking at the time. In a bizarre attempt to gain sympathy, he spoke of fathers and daughters, trying to paint himself as a family man wrongfully accused. But the detail that would haunt him and become the subject of ridicule worldwide was his claim that he did not sweat at the dance with Giuffre due to a rare medical condition involving excess adrenaline that supposedly shut down his sweat glands. His refusal to sweat became a grotesque self-parodying defense, turning a serious accusation into a spectacle of denial. Andrew's public confession wasn't one of remorse or guilt. It was a stubborn refusal, cloaked in absurdity. I don't sweat. As accusations mounted, Andrew didn't quietly recede. The same spoiled, petulant child who once bullied palace guards, kicked horses, and mocked staff, now faced the harsh reality of consequences. The palace had no choice but to act. On November 20th, 2019, Prince Andrew announced he would step back from public duties indefinitely, 4 days after that infamous interview aired on November 16. In the interview, his attempts to defend his friendship with Epstein backfired spectacularly, denying ever meeting Virginia Giuffre, insisting he couldn't sweat, and claiming it was honorable to stay at Epstein's house, unleashed a wave of public outrage. Businesses, universities, and charities swiftly severed ties. The backlash was so severe that Andrew himself issued a statement admitting his association with Epstein had become a major disruption to the royal families. Worked with the Queen's approval. He was the first senior royal forced into semi-retirement purely due to scandal. But even after Epstein's death in 2019 and Maxwell's arrest in 2020, Andrew avoided the United States at all costs. His lawyers fiercely fought off legal attempts to serve him papers, delaying justice for years until Virginia finally sued him in a New York court in 2021. That lawsuit was catastrophic. Reports later revealed that the Queen had to help finance part of Andrew's settlement at up to £12 million, not as an admission of guilt, but to avoid the embarrassment of a public trial. The world watched in stunned silence. A prince had quietly written a check to silence allegations of sex abuse. But a settlement couldn't bury the disgrace. It couldn't stop the tide of public fury, especially as Britain wrestled with economic decline, the fallout from Prince Harry and Meghan's exit, and then the death of Prince Philip in 2021. At Philip's funeral, Andrew walked behind the coffin but was ordered to remain out of the public eye. Cameras caught him nonetheless. Disgraced figure walking silently among siblings. A far cry from the proud naval officer, Falklands veteran, and once favored son of the Queen. By 2022, as Queen Elizabeth passed, Andrew's appearances were carefully managed. He was banned from wearing his military uniform during her funeral procession, allowed only a brief exception during the Lion-In state. Crowds booed. Hecklers shouted, "You're a sick old man." Police even arrested protesters for disturbing him for the first time in centuries. A British prince could not appear in public without facing outright hostility. Behind palace walls, another battle raged. King Charles quietly made it clear Andrew would never return to frontline royal duties. Leaked reports revealed Andrew begged for reinstatement, insisting he had a role to play. But the answer was firm and final. No role left. Sources claimed he even considered legal action to force his way back into public. Life's desperation revealing the deepest fear. Without the palace, he was simply a disgraced man, stripped of his identity. And by 2024, the scandal kept mounting. A Chinese businessman, known only as H6 in court papers and later identified as Young Tombo, was banned from the UK in March 2023 on national security grounds. Judges found H6 had gained an unusual level of trust with Prince Andrew. Documents revealed Andrew's advisor, Dominic Hampshire, had authorized H6 to act on Andrew's behalf in talks with potential Chinese investors. Hampshire's letter told H6, outside of the prince's closest internal confidants, you sit at the very top of a tree that many people would like to be on. Authorities believe H6 was linked to the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Departmentan organization, known for covert influence operations of files from H6's devices showed attempts to leverage his relationship with Andrew for political and business advantage. Andrew's office insisted all contacts ceased once concerns were raised, and that meetings were purely official. No sensitive matters were ever discussed. But the damage was done. The prince's name was once again dragged through a mire of scandal, intrigue, and suspicion. His fall from grace had become a cautionary tale about power, privilege, and the heavy price of recklessness.